and welcome to Shattering Myths. I am Yahowah. You can reach us toll-free, 877-300-7645 if you'd like to participate in today's program. Before we return to the topic we were covering yesterday in the first hour, which is the nature of the agreement reached with Iran regarding its nuclear ambitions, I did want to comment on the stupidity of what's being reported in the news regarding the Boeing Dreamliner with the GE engines, whereby the edict has gone out that the airplane should not be flown near or through thunderstorms. It is astonishing just how bad news reporting can be. Now, I have a particular issue with SRN, but in this particular case, they're no worse than was CNN when I saw Como as their anchor just make an absolute fool of himself as he presented this news yesterday. Airplanes, at least all high-performance airplanes, come with three very specific means to determine the location of thunderstorms. One is a strike finder, which shows where there is electrical discharge, which is part of a thunderstorm. Another is onboard radar, which shows real-time information on heavy precipitation, which is evocative of thunderstorms. And third is uplink weather radar that shows the Doppler radar and also shows cell heights and shows cell movement, and that is also to identify and locate thunderstorms. Now, the reason that all of these airplanes have all three of these devices is because, as a pilot, we do not fly our airplanes through thunderstorms. There's several reasons for not doing this. One is that we can encounter severe icing beyond the aircraft's capability to shed the ice. Many aircraft fail and crash, killing all aboard every year as a direct result of picking up more ice than the airplane can shed using its anti-ice capabilities. Number two, in and around thunderstorms, there is lightning. Now, that lightning doesn't always reach the ground. There's also horizontal lightning, and in the kind of thunderstorms that have been affecting these GE engines, they can be in the billions of amps. And not only does it destroy the avionics in the airplane, crippling the airplane in terms of the pilot's situational awareness, one of these days, in one of these extraordinarily high discharge lightning strikes, there's the possibility that a fuel cell will be ignited, destroying the airplane. So that's the second reason we don't fly through thunderstorms, or even near thunderstorms, because the lightning can reach out beyond the thunderstorms, as can the icing. The third is turbulence. The turbulence can be so severe that it can actually damage the airplane, but there isn't any passenger or pilot that wants to be beaten senseless. It's harmful, dangerous. And for these three reasons, pilots don't fly through or near thunderstorms. We avoid them. Now, this particular GE engine is suspect only because it is the only engine, it's actually part of a series of new engines that are higher bypass engines, that are actually capable of flying high enough and flying to fly through the tops of thunderstorms where the air is a little less violent, although NASA is currently examining these extraordinarily high amperage and voltage lightning strikes in them that are stunningly dangerous. But GE is the only company that actually makes an engine that is capable on long-range flights, particularly through the tropics, of encountering these kinds of storms. And so it has given pilots and airlines the ability to do what they should not do, which is to fly through tropical thunderstorms, particularly thunderstorms in the tropics, where you have moisture at very high levels in the atmosphere. When this happens, there is the possibility of damaging the engines of these aircraft, but you ought not be there. So this notification not to fly within 50 nautical miles of high and humid thunderstorms isn't something that's new. It's only this engine that's giving pilots and airlines the capability of doing it, but no one in their right mind ought to do it. It's very risky, and there's so little to be gained. Because when an aircraft is at altitude, say at 40,000 feet, for example, the width of a thunderstorm, it narrows as you go up. And with exception of the anvil cloud, which is the discharge off to one direction, they are extraordinarily easy with the equipment that we have and with the ground guidance as well to fly around. And on a long flight, missing a thunderstorm by 50 miles would typically add 3 or 4 minutes to a long flight. And think of the safety implications associated with it. So while I am certain that GE will come up with a solution to the ingestion of ice that is possible in a very high altitude, high humidity thunderstorm, and return the capability of aircraft to fly through them, we ought not ever do so. Now, turning back to the news, we were considering what was at stake with the celebrated agreement between the Obama administration that was desperate for news of anything other than the complete failure of the Affordable Care Act, which turned out to be unaffordable to those who were actually paying for their own health care because they all lost their policies. That what we have found is that there isn't much to celebrate in this agreement, but we'll continue to review it throughout today's program. This was reported by CNN. It said that during the negotiations in Geneva, the Ayatollah Khamenei responded to passionate Israeli skepticism by saying Israeli officials, and I quote, cannot even be called humans, end quote. He referred to Netanyahu specifically as the rabid dog of the region, end quote. Now, why would anyone in their right mind, after hearing that kind of a statement, continue to negotiate with such a country? When the leader of a country makes a statement that calls the leaders of a nation non-human, when he refers to the president of that nation as a rabid dog, and when that nation is the sponsor of Hezbollah, a ruthless terrorist organization, when that nation provides absolutely no freedoms for its people and suppresses them, why would you negotiate a deal with that nation? You think you can trust them? Netanyahu said the regime in Iran is dedicated to destroying Israel. Well, they've said that on so many occasions that it's a truthful statement, and Israel has the right and obligation to defend itself with its own forces against every threat. Netanyahu is saying the world's going to turn a blind eye towards this and enable and abet the Iranian nuclear program by freeing Iranian assets, then Israel will have to deal with the problem and the threat itself. This from a Western diplomat who was involved in the talks. He says the Iranians simply use the negotiations to buy time and to get access to more money. He didn't say the last part. I just added it because it's true. He, of course, spoke on the condition of anonymity. One of the remaining sticking points, according to sources familiar with the negotiation, involved Iran's controversial, partly completed heavy water reactor in the city of Arak. U.S. officials fear that the reactor, if completed, could give Iran a potential supply of plutonium, which could be used in nuclear weapons. The only purpose The singular and sole purpose of the heavy water facility in Iraq is to convert uranium-235 to plutonium. That is its sole purpose. The sole purpose of plutonium is to make a bomb. There's not a threat here. When they started building that facility, then should you not have been convinced by Iran's refining of uranium-235 past 4% fissile purity to 20%, which, and 20%, by the way, even though 90% of which is necessary for a bomb, the energy and effort to take uranium to 20% fissile purity is 90% of that which is required both in time and energy and effort to make a bomb. In other words, from standard uranium to 20% fissile purity, that's 90% of the way. In time and in effort and in energy and in complexity, it's 10% of the way to get it from 20% to 90%. Now, it is also interesting that even Iran bothering to enrich any uranium is suspect. Now, I've shared that with you because it makes no sense for a nation that sits on vast reserves of natural gas and oil, more natural gas than it could burn in lifetimes, generations, millennia, in terms of powering electric generation, that it turns out that the only nuclear power plant that Iran has, one that was originally gifted to Iran by the United States in the Atoms for Peace program under Jerry Ford and Henry Kissinger during the Shah's regime, was worked on by the French after the United States pulled away during the Iranian hostage crisis, and then was completed by the Russians. The Russians are providing all of the fuel. So all of the fuel for that plant is provided by the Russians. The Iranians do not need to refine uranium to fuel that plant. And of course, the moment they took uranium from 4% fissile purity to 20, they demonstrated that they had absolutely no interest in electricity, because you do not use 20% fissile purity uranium to drive a nuclear reactor to generate electricity. We'll be back with Shattering Myths after the commercial break. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. The United States negotiating team insisted that Iran not fuel its heavy water reactor during the 6-month period. It's actually fairly irrelevant that the facility is not yet complete, so it can't be fueled in the next 6 months anyway. But that's the nature of this whole agreement. Almost everything that is in the agreement was the status quo and has been the status quo in Iran. So Iran simply stands pat, doesn't give up anything. And for giving up nothing, it has billions of dollars of its assets released to it, and it can now conduct trade, particularly in petrochemicals, as well as it can hoard gold, which it can use to buy whatever it needs to complete its nuclear ambitions. And that's what we're going to find throughout this discussion. Negotiators had haggled over whether the final agreement would recognize Iran's right to enrich uranium, and yet the deal says specifically that Iran has the right to enrich uranium. Now, they're saying that it has the right to enrich uranium up to 5% fissile purity, but why would Iran need to enrich uranium to 5% fissile purity when they only have one nuclear power plant, and the fuel for it is supplied by the Russians, who completed the plant? I mean, there is first, there's no reason for them to have a nuclear power plant because they're energy sufficient with natural gas and oil and can generate all the electricity they need just by not burning off and squandering their natural gas reserves. But just think of this. I mean, there is literally no reason for them to need to enrich uranium to 5% fissile purity. The interim pact, according to most reports, and I'm going to share one now that comes from the New York Times, it says, by itself, the interim pact does not foreclose either side's main options or require any irreversible actions. And that's true. This interim agreement is simply that. It is 6 months. Everything that is noteworthy is actually put off to the negotiation of a more enduring agreement, but none of the terms, the conditions, or the parameters of that enduring agreement are actually part of this interim agreement. This is simply a 6-month period where Iran makes a number of pledges which are simply, with one exception, are status quo, and where the United States and Europe and others see to it that Iran is financially enriched during this period of time. It is a huge win for the Iranians, who gave up nothing and gained an enormous amount of relief from sanctions, and there is no promise, no expectation of anything more. Named the Joint Plan of Action, the 4-page agreement specifies in very terse, which means limited language, the steps that Iran would initially take to constrain its nuclear effort. It's very terse. But it is profuse. In other words, about 3 of the 4 pages are specific, detailed examples regarding the financial relief that Iran would get from the United States and those in Europe. This agreement, by just the eyeball test, what does it focus on? Well, it focuses on, in its specifics, giving Iran financial relief, which enables Iran to complete its nuclear program with the capital reserves necessary to do so. The few technical details in the agreement are actually left to the footnotes. The agreement's preamble says nothing more than that a comprehensive solution is the eventual goal, but that the broad elements of that solution are only given in bullet points on the final page. And it says that none of those things are binding unless there is complete and total mutual agreement, which there will never be. While the United States, in all of this, Iran agrees to preserve its nuclear infrastructure, preserve it. That means that they get to keep everything in place. They don't have to do anything that they haven't already done. And along with the ability to develop a nuclear device, there is no language that says they have to refrain from the weaponizing process of turning uranium and plutonium into a bomb, or creating the missile technology, intercontinental missile technology, to deliver that bomb. No restraints whatsoever on that. The only restraints are on the fissile purity 20% uranium. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. As we look at what the agreement actually says, it's interesting that the comprehensive agreement that is contemplated but not articulated in the first step doesn't even provide a time for it, a duration of it. In other words, it's written in such a way that it says, oh, there'll be a specific time limit to the next agreement if one is actually reached, telling us that the Iranians are expecting that even if one is negotiated, it would only endure a period of time, after which, they would have all of their money. They would be set to go as it relates to their chemical petro exports, and they would then be able to do whatever they darn well pleased. Iran's program to enrich uranium needs to be dealt with, but it has not been dealt with in this particular deal, other than to say over 6 months all they're going to do is enrich uranium to 5% fissile purity. The Obama administration has said that it's not prepared to concede that Iran has the right to enrich uranium, which is doublespeak because their own language in the agreement says that, quote, mutually defined enrichment program with practical limits and transparency has been agreed upon. So they agreed that Iran has the right to enrich uranium. It even specifies it at up to 5%. So the question remains, the questions that remain, is whether or not Iran will be allowed to continue enriching uranium. That was pretty well answered. Yes, they will. And then, what will the United States and its negotiating partners insist on in return, because Iran's not being thwarted in terms of the enrichment of uranium. And so the United States might say, well, it's only practical needs. Well, they don't have any practical need because, A, they don't need uranium to boil water to produce electricity because they're burning off and just squandering natural gas. Second, the one nuclear power plant already has a supply of uranium rods. They were supplied by the Russians, and the Russians are more than willing to supply a new set of rods when those finally are exhausted. So they don't have a practical need. That's just the bottom line. So why give any sanction relief to Iran with the language that allows them to continue to enrich uranium? Gary Seymour, who served as a senior aide on nonproliferation issues for the National Security Council, said, as it relates to the limits that would be restrictions that would be imposed on the Iranian refinement efforts, he says, the non-proliferation folks want a very small and very limited capability, but the Iranians want industrial scale. And therein is the difference. The negotiators will confront other difficult questions regarding elements of a comprehensive agreement, which I'm saying will never be reached, which will the Fordo enrichment plant, which is buried deep underground, have to be shut down? And the answer will be no, they won't shut it down. Will the heavy water reactor Iran is building in the town of Iraq be allowed to be completed? Yes, it will be completed. That's not much of a question either. Will it produce plutonium for weapons? Well, that's the only purpose for its development. Will it be dismantled? No, not any chance of that. Otherwise, they would have put it into this provision. Will Iran be thwarted on its nuclear weapons research? And the answer to that is obviously no. It wasn't even mentioned in this agreement. There is no throttling back of it or curbing it of any kind. The interim deal did not do enough to narrow down the limitations that will be in the final deal, said David Albright, president of the Institute for Science and International Security. Some analysts said that hammering out a comprehensive solution seems so onerous that it will never be reached. The interim deal includes improved verification. Yes, there is some additional verification on some sites, but not all sites. Some constraints on Iran's installation of new centrifuges. Yes, over the 6 months they can't install any new ones, but they have 10,000 that are just sitting idle, that were already sitting idle, that are to remain idle. There's no reason for them to install any new ones. There just isn't. And the ones they have installed that are running will continue to run. Now, the interim deal does have language that says that the existing stock of uranium that is enriched to 20% fissile purity, which is only at that level to produce a bomb, could either be converted to oxide, which is a less readily used form for the purposes of a bomb, or taken back down to 5% purity, which would then be ramped back up to 20% at any time. Now, what's interesting is that I did a fair amount of research on what this means, where Iran was at the time, and the like, and I'll share that with you momentarily. The United States has successfully opposed, this article says, Iran's demand that it be allowed to continue installing components at its heavy water plant in Iraq. Actually, the interim agreement just says that they won't make advances on it, whatever the word advance means, although there will be no inspections there. And it says that we will not fuel it. They will not fuel it, which they couldn't do anyway because it's not complete. And by the way, you don't need plutonium to make a nuclear bomb. The first bomb that we dropped on Japan was a uranium-235 bomb. The second was plutonium. As the talks progressed, the amount of revenue frozen in foreign banks that Iran would be allowed to retrieve was raised from $4.2 billion. Raised to $4.2 billion from $3.6 billion. Immediately upon signing this, Iran received $4.2 billion. Senator Bob Crocker of the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee told Fox News that Iran was celebrating because its deal with the U.S. Enabled it to continue to enrich uranium while getting billions of dollars in crippling sanctions lifted. He, of course, like all Americans, love the football metaphor, says they are spiking the ball in the end zone. CNN then reported that the full text, they actually provided the full text of the nuclear agreement. I'm going to share aspects of it with you, including the entirety of its preamble. It reads, and this is directly from the document itself, 4 pages. The goal for these negotiations, not the conclusion of these negotiations. So the moment you read the second word, then you know that they really haven't agreed to anything. All they've agreed is to negotiate. This is an announcement of a goal, not the announcement of a treaty. The goal for these negotiations is to reach a mutually agreed, long-term, comprehensive solution that would ensure Iran's nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful. So that's the goal. That's not the achievement. And that's out there in the future. That is a statement of intent, not a statement of fact or of conclusion. Iran affirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek to develop any nuclear weapons. What does the affirmation of a nation guided by Islam, where the Quran itself says that any agreement between Muslims and non-Muslims is not binding on the Muslim, what is the value of such a statement? If you said none, you would be correct. This comprehensive solution would build on, now this comprehensive solution, that's the one envisioned, not the one reached, would build on these initial measures and result in a final step for a period to be agreed upon and the resolution of concerns. In other words, the period for an actual agreement has not even been determined. The period of time that it would endure has not been determined. It's not ongoing. This is not they're not even envisioning a long-term agreement. Period to be agreed on is all it says, and the resolution of concerns which have not been resolved. This comprehensive solution, speaking about what they are anticipating, what they're trying to achieve as a goal, not what they have achieved, would enable Iran to fully enjoy its right to nuclear energy for peaceful purposes under the relevant articles of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in conformity with its obligations therein. Now that is the the goal, not the achievement. This comprehensive solution, again speaking of the goal, which is just stunning that this is in the preamble. So the preamble of this is saying, we haven't reached an agreement. All we're announcing here is that we want to reach an agreement. We have a goal of reaching an agreement. This comprehensive solution would involve a mutually defined enrichment program with practical limits and transparency measures to ensure the peaceful nature of the program. But right there in the preamble, the United States is capitulating that they envision in this agreement that Iran will be able to continue to enrich uranium when it has absolutely no need to do so for peaceful purposes. This comprehensive solution would constitute an integrated whole where nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Thank you very much. That statement says nobody is agreeing to any of this unless all of it is agreed to, which means that Iran's statement that it affirms that under no circumstance will Iran ever seek to develop any nuclear weapons, well, that's only valid if the United States agrees to everything Iran wants. And since there is 0% chance that the world, including the United States, will agree to everything Iran wants, then Iran doesn't have to uphold anything that it has said. That's what that statement means. That this comprehensive solution, the one that's anticipated the goal, would constitute an integrated whole where nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. I've never seen any language like that in any contract. That is to say that nothing that we agree to here is binding until we've reached a comprehensive agreement where everything is agreed. There is no set of circumstances in international affairs, in even business, where everything is agreed. Ever. People might acquiesce to things to get an agreement done, but they acquiesce, they'll compromise, not agree. Never. It's impossible. Yes, in the preamble to the agreement that the United States reached with Iran, we find that there really isn't an agreement that the United States reached with Iran, only a preamble that says that Iran and the United States seek to reach, or at least are discussing the possibility of having an agreement, but that such agreement, this comprehensive solution, would constitute an integrated whole where nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. That is impossible. Has never occurred in the history of human events, is not going to occur here. And it says this comprehensive solution, speaking of pie in the sky, of course, would involve a reciprocal step-by-step process and would produce a comprehensive lifting of all UN sanctions from the Security Council, as well as multilateral and national sanctions related to Iran's nuclear program. So it's saying here that the comprehensive solution doesn't, in terms of what things are going to be resolved, what things have to be agreed on, it's the lifting of all UN, Security Council sanctions, and all multinational and multilateral sanctions on Iran's nuclear program. Doesn't say a thing here about Iran having to move away from developing a bomb. It's focused entirely on what Iran would receive, which is everything. As a matter of fact, can you imagine an agreement where every nation on earth agrees to lift sanctions on Iran and to vote for its nuclear ambitions and for regarding economic sanctions to prohibit its desire to build a bomb? For example, do you think there's any chance that Israel is going to do so? And therefore, just the language in the preamble makes it absolutely impossible that any agreement will be reached, that everything will be agreed to by Iran? We have Glenn from Philadelphia calling in on this topic. Welcome back, Glenn. Good to hear from you.
Hello, Yada. Good morning. I'd like to take 30 seconds just to throw a few more monkey wrench variables into this equation to further complicate it. There are those who are reporting, supposedly through high-level military contacts, that Iran has already long ago taken delivery of nuclear weapons from Russia, that Saudi Arabia has taken delivery of nuclear weapons from Pakistan. We have Israel and Saudi Arabia collaborating about attacking Iran, and Saudi Arabia saber-rattling and posturing that they will attack even if Israel does not. And then finally you have Obama's sympathies on the matter towards Islam. And
let me can I interrupt you here? I'm just going to stop because it's so much easier to respond to one thing than to 10 things at a time. And all your points are interesting here, Glenn. First, well, I cannot verify that the Soviet Union, Russia. I think of Putin. He's a fascist now, not a communist. So it's really not the Soviet Union. It's fascist Russia. Although I don't want to demean Putin because he kept the United States out of starting World War III in Syria. But the reality is that, while I cannot confirm that Russia has given Iran nuclear weapons, it has certainly given Iran the capability that Iran lacked to complete its nuclear weapons program, and that was a quid pro quo for Iran's ceasing to weaponize the Chechen Muslims in their quest to terrorize Russia. And so whether or not they actually gave them bombs or they gave them the capability of making bombs, I guess that's a very small point, but my information is consistent with yours and the Russian support. Second, I'm convinced that since Pakistan is a nation that is economically challenged, that the only way that Pakistan was capable of completing its nuclear ambitions was with Saudi financing, and that the coterminous move of Saudi financing of the Pakistani nuclear program and the Pakistanis telling the United States to abandon $5 billion worth of bases in Saudi Arabia was a direct result of Saudi Arabia acquiring nuclear bombs since they had paid for them from the Pakistanis. So I am absolutely convinced that your second aspect of that is correct. It is also interesting, Glenn, and we'll talk after the commercial break, that Israel is not the nation that is the most angry at the United States for this agreement. The nation that's most angry is Saudi Arabia.